The call came during a board meeting. My phone vibrated against the conference table, drawing irritated glances from my colleagues. I normally silence it completely, but something made me keep it on vibrate that day. Maybe some part of me knew. I excused myself, heels clicking against marble as I stepped into the hallway. The caller ID showed Detective Morrison. My stomach dropped before I even answered. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Morrison with the Metro Police Department." I leaned against the wall, my free hand pressed flat against the cool surface. "Yes?" "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband Eric has been in an accident." The word accident hung in the air like smoke. I'd later learn how carefully chosen that word was, how much it concealed. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to come down to Memorial Hospital. There are some questions we need to ask. I'm Penny, and that call shattered my carefully constructed world into jagged pieces that would never quite fit back together. The drive to the hospital exists in my memory as disconnected fragments, red lights bleeding into each other, the radio playing something upbeat and meaningless. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The emergency room reeked of disinfectant and despair. Detective Morrison met me at the entrance, a tall woman with tired eyes and a notebook that seemed to hold secrets she didn't want to share. "Your husband's car went off Highway 16 around noon," she said, leading me down a fluorescent-lit corridor. "The initial investigation suggests mechanical failure, but—" "But what?" She stopped walking. "The brake lines were cut, Mrs. Thompson." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Cut? You mean—" "We're treating this as a potential homicide." I remember laughing then, a harsh, broken sound that made a nearby nurse glance over in concern. "That's impossible. Eric was, just a businessman. Who would want to—" The detective's expression shifted slightly. "Mrs. Thompson, we've found some concerning documentation in your husband's car. Financial records, threatening emails. Does the name Marcus Blackwood mean anything to you?" I shook my head, but something clicked into place. All those late-night phone calls Eric had been taking lately, the way he'd been distracted and jumpy. "I need to see him," I said. "Mrs. Thompson." Her hesitation told me everything. "Please." She led me to a room where Eric lay covered by a sheet. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I noticed absurd details. His wedding ring catching the harsh hospital lights, a small cut above his left eyebrow that looked fresh, as if it might still be bleeding. "We'll need you to make a formal identification," Detective Morrison said softly. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. Eric's mother Maggie would need to be told, and Cassie, his sister. My father would want to come over, despite his wheelchair making it difficult. But beneath all these practical thoughts, something darker was taking root. Someone had killed my husband. Someone had deliberately sent him off that road to his death. And in that sterile hospital room, standing over the body of the man I loved, I made a promise. I would find out who did this, and they would pay. My phone buzzed again. Maggie's name flashed on the screen. Of course she'd heard already. She always knew everything first. I let it ring, watching until the screen went dark. Some decisions change everything. Standing there, I chose not to answer that call, and that choice would set in motion events I couldn't possibly have predicted. Because sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the sharpest knives. Maggie's house loomed before me, all polished brick and manicured hedges. I sat in my car, watching shadows move behind the curtains. 3 missed calls from her already today. The 4th one would be in person. The front door opened before I could knock. Maggie stood there in a black designer dress, her face a masterpiece of controlled grief. "Finally," she said, pulling me inside. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where have you been?" The foyer smelled of lilies, Eric's favorite. Of course she'd already ordered flowers. "I was at the hospital, Maggie. Then the police station." "The police?" Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat. "What are they saying about my boy?" I studied her face, searching for something genuine beneath the performance. They're saying it wasn't an accident. Cassie appeared at the top of the stairs, mascara smeared beneath her eyes. For once, her expensive clothes looked rumpled, lived in. What do you mean, not an accident? The brake lines were cut, I said, watching both their faces. Maggie's hand tightened on the banister. Cassie's eyes widened. That's ridiculous, Maggie snapped. Who would want to hurt Eric? He was beloved in the community. Unless... She turned to me, eyes narrowing. What have you done to protect my son's interests lately, Penny? All those late nights at the office. Were you even paying attention to what was happening? Don't you dare, I said, my voice low. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. Mother, Cassie interrupted, descending the stairs. This isn't helping. No, Maggie's voice rose. Then what would help, Cassandra? Because my son is dead, and someone needs to answer for that. She turned back to me. We need access to the business accounts. Everything. Eric always said it was a family business. Eric said a lot of things, I replied, but legally, I'm his next of kin. And until we know what happened, everything stays locked down. You can't do that. Maggie stepped closer, her carefully constructed facade cracking. That business was built with Thompson money. Our money. You're just an outsider who Eric chose to marry, I cut in, who he trusted with everything. Did he? Cassie asked quietly. Something in her tone made me turn. She was holding her phone, screen glowing in the dimness of the foyer. Because I have some interesting emails here that suggest otherwise. My stomach clenched. What emails? Eric was planning changes, Cassie said, glancing at her mother. Big ones. Maybe that's why someone wanted him dead. Show me, I demanded. All in good time, Maggie interrupted. Right now, we need to focus on arrangements. The funeral needs to be perfect. Eric deserves that much. The police haven't released his body yet, I said. They're still investigating. Investigating what? Cassie's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. What exactly did Eric tell you about his business dealings, Penny? The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about the detective's words. Marcus Blackwood. The name I didn't recognize, but they clearly did, judging by the look that passed between mother and daughter. I think, I said carefully, that we all need to be very honest about what we know. Honest? Maggie laughed, a brittle sound. My dear, you wouldn't know what to do with honesty if it slapped you in the face. Now, about those accounts. No. I moved toward the door. You'll hear from my lawyer. Penny, Cassie called after me. The emails, you should really see them. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Send them to me. Outside, the evening air felt thick with unspoken threats. My phone buzzed. A text from Cassie. There's more to this than you know. Meet me tomorrow, alone. I got in my car, watching the house in my rearview mirror. Maggie stood at the window, her silhouette rigid with fury. Beside her, Cassie raised her phone to her ear, speaking urgently to someone. The game had begun, and I was already several moves behind. But as I drove away, one thing became crystal clear. Someone in that house knew exactly why Eric died, and I was going to find out who. The emails arrived at 3 a.m. My hands shook as I scrolled through them, Eric's words glowing accusingly in the darkness of our bedroom, our former bedroom. The deal with Blackwood is worse than we thought. If Mother finds out what we've done, I kept reading, each message revealing more layers of deception. Eric and Cassie had been working together, planning something big, something that terrified them both. My father's voice crackled through the phone. Penny, it's nearly dawn. You should sleep. Dad, I need your help understanding these financials. I switched to speaker, spreading papers across the bed. Eric was moving money around, lots of it, but the numbers don't add up. You're good with numbers, he said. Better than Eric ever was. That's just it. I stared at a particularly suspicious transfer. These aren't amateur mistakes. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. A knock at the door made me freeze. Through the peephole, I saw Cassie, mascara-stained and trembling. I couldn't sleep, she said when I opened the door, and there's something you need to see. She pulled out a USB drive. turning it over in her manicured hands. Eric gave me this the day before the accident. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got it. Why didn't you mention this at the house? Mother was watching. Cassie's voice cracked. She's always watching. Penny? My father's voice came through the phone. Who's there? It's Cassie, I said, studying her face. Dad, I'll call you back. I plugged in the drive. Cassie paced behind me, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. Files populated the screen. Contracts, emails, photos. One folder was simply labeled MB. Marcus Blackwood, Cassie whispered. Mother's old friend, the one who helped start the company. The photos showed Eric and Blackwood in heated discussion outside a restaurant. The timestamp was 3 days before the accident. Eric was going to expose him, Cassie said. The whole operation. But Mother... A car door slammed outside. Cassie rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. She's here. God, she followed me. Maggie Thompson strode up the walkway, her face set in lines of fury. I grabbed the USB drive, but Cassie caught my wrist. Wait, she hissed. There's something else you need to know. About the brake lines. The doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the tension like a knife. Cassie went rigid, her fingers digging into my arm. Don't, she whispered. Please, she'll... The doorbell rang again, followed by pounding. Cassandra, Maggie's voice carried through the door. I know you're in there, both of you. I moved toward the door, but Cassie blocked my path. You don't understand. The company, the money, it's all built on lies. Eric found proof. Found proof of what? Tears streaked her makeup. That Mother killed. The sound of a key in the lock silenced us both. I spun around as the door swung open, revealing Maggie with a spare key, Eric's key, in her hand. Well, she said, her smile sharp as broken glass. Isn't this cozy? A little late-night conspiracy? How dare you use his key, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Oh, darling. Maggie stepped inside, her heels clicking like bullets on the floor. Everything that was Eric's is family property now, including whatever my daughter just gave you. She held out her hand expectantly. Behind her, through the open door, I saw a man standing by a black car. Even in the darkness, I recognized him from the photos, Marcus Blackwood. Cassie saw him too. She made a small, frightened sound. The drive, Maggie demanded. Now. I clutched it tighter, feeling the edges dig into my palm. In that moment, I understood something terrible. This wasn't just about Eric's death anymore. This was about something much older, something buried deep in the Thompson family's past. And Maggie would do anything to keep it there. I slipped the USB drive into my boot while backing away from Maggie. Get out of my house. Your house? She laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Everything here belongs to the Thompson family, including whatever secrets you think you've discovered. Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room with something cold and calculating. Margaret, perhaps we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Eric left everything to me. The house, the business. The business? Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. My dear, you have no idea what you're involved in. Cassie moved between us, her hands trembling. Marcus, please. This isn't what Eric would have wanted. Eric, he said softly, made several unfortunate decisions near the end. Decisions that needed correction. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I reached for my phone, but Maggie was faster. Looking for this? She held up my cell phone. You really should be more careful about leaving things lying around. A text message flashed on the screen. From Detective Morrison. My stomach lurched as Maggie read it aloud. Found something in Eric's office. Meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. How interesting. She pocketed my phone. It seems we're not the only ones asking questions. Mother, Cassie whispered, don't do this. Do what, darling? Protect our family? Maggie's voice hardened. Like I protected you after that incident with the Martinez contract. Cassie went pale. You promised never to. Promises, I cut in. Like the promise Eric made about the Blackwood deal. Something shifted in Blackwood's expression. What exactly did Eric tell you? Enough. I moved toward the kitchen, where I kept a second phone hidden in a drawer. Enough to know why he was meeting with federal investigators the week before he died. Maggie's composure cracked. You're lying. Am I? Check the USB drive. I watched their faces carefully. Oh, wait, you can't. Because I already sent copies to my lawyer. It was a bluff, but it hit home. Blackwood grabbed Maggie's arm, whispering something urgent in her ear. Penny, Cassie said suddenly, the painting in Eric's office. Did you ever look behind it? Maggie slapped her. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. That's enough, I snapped, but Cassie was already laughing, a high, hysterical sound. You can't keep it hidden forever, she said, touching her reddened cheek. Eric found the real ledgers. He knew what you did to Dad. The room went silent. Maggie's face drained of color. What about your father? I asked carefully. Nothing, Maggie cut in. Cassandra is confused. Marcus, perhaps you should take her home. I'm not confused, Cassie said, her voice stronger now. Tell her, Mother. Tell her how Dad really died. Blackwood moved suddenly, but I was already running for the kitchen. I heard glass breaking, Cassie screaming, Maggie shouting orders. My fingers found the spare phone just as heavy footsteps approached. I texted Detective Morrison. Thompson House, now, murder confession incoming. The kitchen door burst open. Blackwood stood there, his expensive suit incongruous with the violence in his eyes. The ledgers, he said quietly. Where are they? Where you'll never find them. Another bluff, but I was starting to piece it together. Eric's father's accident years ago, the company's sudden success afterward, Eric's desperate investigation in his final days. From the other room, I heard Cassie's voice, raw with years of buried truth. She killed him, Penny. She killed them both. Blackwood lunged forward just as police sirens wailed in the distance. In the chaos that followed, one thought crystallized with terrible clarity. Eric hadn't just been investigating fraud. He'd been unraveling a decades-old murder, and it had cost him everything. Now I had to finish what he started, or I'd be next. Detective Morrison's office felt like a cage. I paced while she reviewed the USB files, each click of her mouse marking another second we were exposed. Mrs. Thompson, she said finally, these records go back 20 years. Are you certain about Marcus Blackwood's involvement? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Liam. Third call today. I sent it to voicemail. Eric's father didn't die in an accident, I said. According to those files, Maggie and Blackwood orchestrated it. The company was failing, but the insurance payout saved it. And you believe they did the same to your husband? The door opened. Another detective entered, whispering something in Morrison's ear. Her expression darkened. Your father-in-law's case was ruled an accident, she said carefully. Reopening it would require substantial evidence. A familiar voice cut through the room. Liam stood in the doorway, holding a thick manila envelope. Like these? Morrison frowned. This is a closed meeting, Mr. Carter. I'm Mrs. Thompson's attorney now. He placed the envelope on the desk. And these are the original ledgers from the Thompson Company, the ones Eric found behind that painting. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. How did you... Eric contacted me the day before he died, Liam said quietly. He knew they were watching him. Asked me to keep these safe. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. You knew, all this time. Penny, don't. I backed away from both of them. You let me stumble around in the dark while you had proof. I was trying to protect you. Liam reached for my arm. If Blackwood knew you had these, like he knew Eric had them. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Did you tell them? Is that why they were ready for him that day? Morrison stood. Mrs. Thompson, if you're suggesting... My phone buzzed again. Cassie's text made my blood freeze. Mother knows about the ledgers. Dad's old cabin. Come alone or they'll hurt Robert. I have to go, I said, grabbing my purse. Penny, wait. Liam blocked the door. You can't trust Cassie, she's been working with them. How would you know that? I studied his face, seeing it clearly for the first time. Unless... He didn't deny it. Everything I did was to keep you safe. Safe? I laughed, the sound brittle and strange. My husband is dead, my father's being held hostage, and you've been playing both sides this whole time. Morrison moved toward her phone. I'm calling for backup. No. I pulled out my gun. Eric's gun, found in his office safe. No one calls anyone. Liam's eyes widened. Put that down. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. I backed toward the door. For the first time, I understand exactly what needs to be done. Penny, please. The ledgers stay here, I told Morrison. Evidence for both murders. But I'm going to that cabin. It's a trap, Liam said softly. Of course it is. I kept the gun steady. But unlike you, I don't abandon family. I left them there, Morrison reaching for her radio, Liam calling my name. The drive to the cabin stretched before me, dark and winding, like the path that had led to this moment. Eric had died trying to expose the truth. Now his mother was threatening my father, using him as bait, and Liam, the one person I thought I could trust, had been manipulating everything from the start. The gun felt heavy in my purse. I'd never fired one before, but as I drove toward the mountains, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead brought a strange calm. I was ready to use it, because sometimes justice and revenge are the same thing. The cabin loomed ahead, a dark shape against the mountain sky. Dad's wheelchair tracks marked the gravel. They'd dragged him inside. My hands tightened on Eric's gun as I approached. Cassie opened the door before I knocked. You shouldn't have come. Where is he? She stepped aside, revealing the cabin's interior. Dad sat in his wheelchair by the fireplace, Maggie standing behind him. Blackwood lounged in an armchair, looking almost bored. Penny, Dad said, his voice steady despite the bruise darkening his cheek. You need to leave. No one's leaving, Maggie announced. Not until we sort this out like family. Family? I kept the gun hidden behind my purse. Is that what you call murdering your husband? Your son? Blackwood straightened. Careful, Mrs. Thompson. Accusations like that can be dangerous. Eric knew, I said, about the insurance fraud, the offshore accounts, everything. Eric was naive, Maggie snapped, just like his father, always wanting to do the right thing, never understanding what it takes to build something lasting. Movement caught my eye. Cassie inching toward a desk drawer. Don't, I warned, finally revealing the gun. Maggie laughed. Do you even know how to use that? Want to find out? Penny, Dad's voice carried a warning. This isn't you. No? I stepped closer to Maggie. Maybe it is now. Maybe this is what happens when you kill someone's husband and threaten their father. I didn't kill Eric, Maggie said softly, but I know who did. The cabin door creaked. Footsteps behind me. Hello, Penny. Liam's voice hit me like a physical blow. I spun, keeping the gun raised, but he already had his weapon trained on me. You followed me. I've been following you since Eric died, he said, making sure you didn't get too close to the truth. The truth? My laugh sounded hysterical even to my own ears. That you're working with them? Working with them? Liam shook his head. Penny, I own them. Who do you think Marcus Blackwood really works for? The room tilted. Memories flashed. Liam's convenient appearances, his careful guidance of my investigation, always steering me toward Maggie and away from... The rival business, I whispered. It was you all along. Eric found out, Cassie said quietly. That's why he contacted the FBI, but Liam got to him first. Shut up, Maggie hissed. No, Mother, I'm done lying. Cassie moved toward me. Eric was trying to protect us all, from him. Liam's smile turned cruel. And now history repeats itself, another Thompson making the same mistake. The ledgers, I said. Detective Morrison has them. Detective Morrison works for me. He stepped closer. Everything works for me, Penny. That's what Eric never understood. That's what got him killed. Dad's wheelchair squeaked as he tried to move. Blackwood pressed him back. You loved me, I said, gun shaking. All those years pretending to be my friend. I did love you, still do. Liam's expression softened. That's why I'm giving you a choice. Put down the gun, sign over the company, walk away with your father, and live. Or join Eric. His weapon didn't waver. Your choice. Time seemed to freeze. Dad's eyes met mine, filled with a lifetime of lessons about right and wrong. Cassie stood trembling, her loyalty finally clear, but too late. Maggie watched with the desperate look of someone seeing their carefully built world crumble. And Liam, the man I'd trusted, who'd held me while I cried over Eric's death, waited for my surrender. I lowered the gun slowly. Smart girl, he said. Then everything happened at once. Dad threw himself forward, wheelchair crashing into Blackwood. Cassie screamed. A shot rang out, and I realized that sometimes the only way to end a nightmare is to wake up shooting. The gunshot echoed through the cabin. Liam staggered back, red blooming across his shoulder. My aim wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Dad's wheelchair had knocked Blackwood off balance, giving me the split second I needed. You stupid girl, Liam snarled, raising his weapon again. Cassie tackled him from behind. They crashed into the desk, sending papers flying. His gun skittered across the floor. The FBI is already coming, I said, keeping my weapon trained on him. The real FBI, not your corrupt agents. Liam laughed through gritted teeth. You're bluffing. Eric wasn't just gathering evidence against you. I moved closer, finger steady on the trigger. He was building a network, people ready to act if anything happened to him. Penny, Maggie's voice shook, he'll kill us all, like you killed your husband. I didn't take my eyes off Liam. Or did you just watch while he did it? Mother didn't know, Cassie said, backing away from Liam. Not about Dad. Not about Eric. Liam threatened to expose her fraud if she didn't help him take over the company. Blackwood lunged for Liam's fallen gun. Dad's cane cracked across his wrist. Stay down, Dad ordered, his teacher's voice cutting through the chaos. Both of you. Sirens wailed in the distance. Liam's face twisted into something inhuman. You have no idea what you've done, he spat. The people I work for will abandon you, I finished, just like you abandoned Eric when he begged for his life. His eyes widened. How did you... The cabin has security cameras. I nodded toward the corner. Eric installed them after someone broke in last year. They've been recording everything. Including your confession, Cassie added. Liam moved faster than I thought possible, producing a hidden blade. He grabbed Maggie, pressing steel against her throat. One last choice, Penny, he said. Let me walk out of here, or watch your mother-in-law die. Maggie trembled in his grip. Despite everything, despite her own crimes, I saw real fear in her eyes. Eric always said you were smart, Liam continued. Be smart now. Lower the gun. I did. Good girl. He backed toward the door, dragging Maggie with him. Maybe I did love you in my way. I loved you too, I said softly. That's why I'm sorry about this. The taser hit him from behind. Detective Morrison stood in the doorway, weapon raised. Federal agents, she shouted as her team swarmed in. Everyone on the ground. Liam collapsed, taking Maggie down with him. Blackwood tried to run, but didn't make it 2 steps. You okay? Morrison asked me later, as paramedics checked Dad's injuries. I watched them lead Liam away in handcuffs. He didn't look back. Eric knew, I said. He knew Liam would come after me next. That's why he left all those breadcrumbs, hoping I'd follow them to the truth. And the security footage. Uploading to the FBI server as we speak. I turned to where Cassie sat with Maggie. They helped in the end. When it mattered, they'll still face charges for their role in the fraud. Good. I felt nothing but exhaustion now. Justice should be blind, right? Morrison smiled slightly. Your husband would be proud. I thought of Eric, of his determination to expose the truth no matter the cost. of his faith that I would finish what he started. The company, I said. What happens to it now? That's up to you. She handed me a card. When you're ready, we'll talk about rebuilding. The right way this time. Dawn was breaking as we left the cabin. Maggie and Cassie were led to separate cars, their futures uncertain, but their secrets finally exposed. Dad waited in the ambulance, strong despite everything. And somewhere, I hoped, Eric could rest, knowing his death hadn't been in vain. The gun felt heavy in the evidence bag. I'd never have to use it again, but its weight would stay with me. A reminder that sometimes justice requires more than just truth. It requires courage to pull the trigger. The courthouse steps felt colder than they should in summer. I watched Liam being led away in chains, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange. He didn't look back this time either. 10 to 20 years, Morrison said, joining me. Plus, whatever they add for Eric's murder once the forensics come back. I nodded, thinking of the security footage that sealed his fate. And Maggie? 5 years, reduced for cooperation. Cassie gets probation. Morrison studied my face. You okay with that? Eric would be. I turned away from Liam's retreating figure. He always said Cassie was just trying to survive their mother. Inside the building, Dad waited with the company paperwork. The restructuring had been his idea, turning the Thompson business into a foundation for supporting whistleblowers and fraud victims. Ready? He asked as I approached. Almost. I walked past him to where Cassie sat alone on a bench, her designer clothes replaced by something simpler, more honest. She looked up as I stopped before her. I never thanked you for the cabin. You chose the right side in the end. Did I? She twisted her hands together. Sometimes I think if I'd been braver sooner, Eric might still be alive. We all think that. I sat beside her. But Eric left us a way to make it right. I handed her the foundation paperwork. Her eyes widened as she read. Co-director? She shook her head. Penny, I can't. Eric believed in second chances, in rebuilding things the right way. I stood. Don't prove him wrong. Dad smiled as I rejoined him. That was good of you. That was justice. I signed the final papers, feeling the weight of the past months lift slightly. Different from revenge, like you always said. The elevator dinged. Maggie emerged between two officers, headed for processing. Our eyes met briefly. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her manipulations and masks. I loved him, she said as they led her past. In my way. I know. I watched her go. That's what makes it tragic. Outside again, Morrison handed me one last item. Eric's phone, finally released from evidence. There's a video, she said quietly, from the night before he died. You should watch it. Later, in Eric's office, my office now, I pressed play. His face filled the screen, tired but determined. Penny, if you're seeing this, I failed. But I knew you'd finish it. You're stronger than all of them. Stronger than me. He paused, smiling that crooked smile I missed so much. The company was never about money. It was about helping people, making things better. I know you'll do that. And Penny? Don't let what they did make you hard. Don't let my death become your prison. The screen went dark. Through the window, I could see the city stretching out, full of possibilities and pitfalls. The Foundation's first meeting was tomorrow. Cassie would be there, bringing her knowledge of the dark side of business. Dad would watch proudly as we built something new from the ashes of betrayal. My phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. They'd found more of Liam's victims, other companies he'd infiltrated and destroyed. The Foundation would help them too. I placed Eric's phone in the desk drawer, next to the gun I'd never fired again after that night. Both reminders, but of different choices. The office door opened. Dad rolled in with takeout bags. Thought you might be hungry. Always taking care of me. That's what family does. He set out the food. The real kind, not the kind that demands loyalty through fear. I joined him, thinking of Eric's words. Don't let my death become your prison. You know what else family does? I asked, grabbing a container. They build things together. Outside, the sun set on the Thompson building, its shadow stretching long across the city. Tomorrow, those shadows would begin to shrink, making way for something brighter, something better, just like Eric always wanted.